Lao Tzu wrote that roughly 2,500 years ago, in a world without social media, without performance reviews, without the infinite audience that modern life has placed in front of every human being, he was describing something he observed not in technology, but in the structure of the mind itself. Most people assume the need for approval is a personality trait, something the insecure have and the confident lack. This assumption is wrong, and it keeps people trapped inside a problem they've misidentified. The need for approval is not a weakness. It is a biological inheritance, one of the oldest drives in the human nervous system. Understanding what it actually is the only way to stop being governed by it. In 2003, neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger conducted an experiment that changed how researchers understand social pain. Participants played a simple computer game, Cyberball, in which they were eventually excluded by the other players. The exclusion wasn't real. The other players were a program. The participants knew this, and yet the brain scans were unambiguous. Social exclusion activated the anterior cingulate cortex, the same region that processes physical pain. Being left out of a computer game hurt the brain the same way a physical blow does, not metaphorically, neurologically. This is why the need for approval cannot be argued away. It is not a thought, it is a pain avoidance system. And pain avoidance systems don't respond to logic, they respond to evidence. The brain that learned that disapproval feels like physical harm will organize behavior around avoiding disapproval with the same urgency it brings to avoiding injury. This is not irrational. For most of human evolutionary history, exclusion from the group was a death sentence. The brain that feared disapproval survived. The brain that didn't was eliminated. What we call the need for approval is the inheritance of every ancestor who lived long enough to have children. But here is where biology becomes biography. The ancestral environment that shaped this drive no longer exists. You are not going to be expelled from the tribe because your colleague disagreed with your idea in a meeting. You are not going to die because someone on the internet didn't like what you said. The threat is gone. The nervous system that responds to the threat is still fully operational, and it runs in most people continuously, scanning the social environment for signs of disapproval, adjusting behavior to minimize it, treating every negative reaction as evidence of genuine danger. The prison Lao Tzu described is not built from malice. It is built from an outdated survival program nobody taught you to update. There's a difference between wanting approval and needing it. Wanting approval is human. It motivates care, effort, attention to others. Needing approval is something else. It is a state in which the absence of approval becomes intolerable, in which you cannot proceed without knowing what they think, in which their silence reads as rejection, their neutrality as disapproval, their disagreement as a verdict on your worth as a person. The transition from wanting to needing is a transition from a preference to a dependency, and like all dependencies, it is invisible from the inside. You don't feel dependent. You feel realistic. You feel appropriately sensitive. You feel like you're simply paying attention to how things actually are. Psychologist Mark Leary developed what he called sociometer theory. The idea that self-esteem is not a fixed internal resource, but a real-time gauge of how much approval you believe you are receiving from others. According to Leary, the self-esteem that rises when praised and falls when criticized is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do, tracking your social standing so you can adjust your behavior to maintain it. But here is what this means in practice. If your self-esteem is a sociometer, then your sense of your own worth is not yours. It belongs to whoever is reading it. Every person whose opinion matters to you holds a dial connected directly to how you feel about yourself, and you have given them that dial without ever deciding to. The moment approval becomes a need is the moment authenticity becomes dangerous, because authentic expression carries the risk of disapproval. And if disapproval registers as threat, then being genuine is neurologically equivalent to stepping toward harm. The mind that has learned this begins to self-censor not as a conscious strategy, but as a reflex. The opinion goes unspoken. The disagreement gets swallowed. The preference gets adjusted. And the self, slowly, incrementally, invisibly, becomes a managed performance rather than a lived experience. Edward Deci's research on motivation produced one of the most counterintuitive findings in the history of psychology. When people do something for intrinsic reasons, because it matters to them, because it reflects who they are, and then external rewards or approval are introduced, their motivation doesn't increase, it decreases. The introduction of external validation shifts the experienced reason for the activity from inside to outside. The person who was painting because painting was meaningful starts painting for the praise. And when the praise stops, so does the painting. What Deci discovered is that approval doesn't sustain people. It hollows them out, slowly replacing the internal compass with an external audience. Self-determination theory, the framework Deci developed with Richard Ryan, identifies autonomy as a basic psychological need, not a personality preference, not an introvert trait. A need as fundamental as food. Autonomy means this precisely: the experience that your actions originate from you, that you are the author, not the character. When approval seeking becomes chronic, autonomy is not merely reduced. It is progressively replaced by heteronomy, the state of being governed by forces outside the self. The person who has lost autonomy doesn't feel governed. They feel normal, because the condition has been present for long enough to become the baseline. The cage becomes the room. What does freedom from approval actually look like? The research is specific. It is not the absence of caring about others. It is not indifference or arrogance. It is a capacity to hold two things simultaneously: genuine care for people around you, and a stable reference point inside yourself that does not move when their reactions change. The person who has this can receive criticism without collapsing, can be misunderstood without immediately correcting it, can disagree without needing the other person to ultimately agree, not because they are cold, because they have an interior. And an interior, a stable, accessible sense of what is true for you, is what approval-seeking slowly erodes and what psychological freedom slowly restores. In 1633, Galileo Galilei stood before the Roman Inquisition and was forced to recant his support for the heliocentric model of the solar system. He recanted. He was 70 years old, threatened with torture, and chose survival. But he had already published. The knowledge was already in the world. The approval of the church had not determined what he observed, what he calculated, or what he chose to share. His recantation was pragmatic. His life's work was not. There is a story, almost certainly apocryphal, that as he left the trial, he said quietly, and yet it moves. Whether he said it or not, the sentiment is precise. What is true does not require institutional approval to remain true. Marcus Aurelius governed the largest empire in the Western world and wrote privately, for no audience, about the daily struggle to not be governed by what others thought of him. The Meditations weren't written for publication. They were written as a practice, the daily discipline of returning to an internal standard rather than an external one. What's striking about the Meditations is not the wisdom, it's the repetition. He returns to the same corrections again and again. Don't seek praise, don't fear blame, hold to what reason endorses, not to what the crowd approves. The repetition reveals that for Marcus Aurelius, as for everyone, freedom from approval was not an achievement. It was a practice, daily, imperfect, never finished. Spinoza was 23 years old when the Jewish community of Amsterdam issued the harshest excommunication in the community's recorded history. He was expelled for ideas that the community could not tolerate. Ideas he hadn't even fully published yet. He lived alone for the rest of his life, grinding lenses for income, writing philosophy that would not be understood for another century. He refused every academic appointment that would have required him to moderate what he thought. Not because he didn't care about belonging. The excommunication devastated him, but because he had identified something he cared about more, the integrity of his own thinking. The approval of his community was real. What he lost was real. What he chose instead was also real, and it outlasted everyone who rejected him. There's a specific kind of tiredness that comes from living for approval that is almost never identified correctly. People call it burnout. They call it anxiety. They call it the pace of modern life. But underneath those names is something more precise, the exhaustion of continuous self-monitoring. The person who needs approval is never fully off. Every interaction contains a background process running simultaneously with the foreground. How am I coming across? Are they judging me? Did that land correctly? Should I have said something different? This background process runs continuously, consumes significant cognitive resources, and produces no useful output. Only anxiety, only adjustment, only the temporary relief or reaction that seems positive before the monitoring begins again. But the deepest cost is not the exhaustion. It is the accumulation of unlived choices. Every time you didn't say what you thought because of how it might be received, that was a choice not made from yourself. Every relationship maintained beyond its natural end because leaving felt too exposed, that was a year or 5 years or a decade not lived from yourself. Every version of yourself you presented instead of the actual one. That was a misencounter between you and another person who never got to meet who you actually are. The arithmetic of approval seeking is brutal when you do it honestly. A life organized around others' reactions is a life in which you are perpetually elsewhere, present to their perceptions and absent from your own experience. Carl Rogers, the psychologist who spent 50 years studying what makes people change, identified what he called conditions of worth. The internalized beliefs about what kind of person earns love and approval. These conditions don't arrive as rules. They arrive as the air you breathe, absorbed from parents, teachers, peers, from every reaction that told you which version of yourself was acceptable and which was not. Rogers observed that the person who lives inside conditions of worth is not free. They are managing, continuously calculating which aspects of themselves to show and which to hide. And in that calculation, in that perpetual management, the most important thing is lost, the direct, unmediated experience of simply being who you are. The freedom of not needing approval is not something you achieve. It is something you practice. And the practice begins not with confidence, because confidence is a result, not a starting point, but with a single, repeatable act, noticing the moment when you are about to adjust yourself for someone else's reaction. Not to stop adjusting, not to become indifferent, but to notice, to see the mechanism at work, to name it, because the approval-seeking mechanism has its greatest power in the millisecond before you become aware of it. That millisecond is where you speak the edited version instead of the real one, where you stay silent instead of saying what you see, where you agree when you don't. Freedom is not the absence of that pull. It never is. Freedom is a moment, however brief, however imperfect, in which you notice the pull and choose not to be moved by it. Their approval was never the point. You were. Inner observer. Observe your mind. Understand reality.